My father kicked me out of the only home I had ever known on a Friday evening in October, while a pot of chili was still simmering on the stove and a football game was playing on the TV in the background. He did it in 11 words. He said, "Nolan, I need you out by the end of the month." That was it. No apology. No hesitation. Not even the basic human courtesy of turning off the television first. 3 months later, I watched his son get escorted out of a federal courtroom in handcuffs, while the judge denied bail and Gerald sat 3 rows behind me, pale as a hospital wall, finally understanding what it feels like when the floor disappears beneath your feet. This is that story, and I want to tell it right because it matters to me that you understand every single piece of it. But to make sense of that courtroom, I need to take you back to that Friday evening in October. The chili on the stove, the football game, and the 11 words that changed everything. My name is Nolan. I was 19 years old when this started. I worked part-time at a carpentry shop called Hendricks & Sons, about 4 miles from the house I grew up in, and I was enrolled in a vocational program at the community college 2 nights a week. I was studying woodworking and construction management, which sounds modest until you understand that the program also covered contracts, property law, and basic financial documentation. My instructor, a retired contractor named Bill Parrish, used to say that a man who cannot read a document is a man who will always be at someone else's mercy. I wrote that down in my notebook on the first day of class. I still have that notebook. Most people who saw me back then assumed I was a quiet kid with no real ambitions. I wore work boots and carried a battered canvas bag, and I did not talk much at parties. What most people did not know was that I had already opened my own savings account at 16, that I kept printed copies of every financial document my family ever signed that I could get my hands on, and that I had a manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk labeled simply, Records. That folder became the most important object in my life. Now let me tell you about Gerald, my father. He was 53 years old, worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-size industrial supply company called Hartwell Incorporated. He drove a company-leased sedan, wore pressed button-downs to the office, and spent most of his evenings talking on the phone about quarterly projections and golf handicaps. To the outside world, Gerald was a responsible man, provider, someone who had built something. To me, he was a man who had spent my entire childhood quietly making clear that I was the wrong son. Travis was the right son. Travis was Gerald's firstborn, 26 years old, born from Gerald's first marriage to a woman named Renee, who left when Travis was 4 and never looked back. By the time I was old enough to understand the dynamic, it was already calcified. Travis was the golden one. I was the extra. The evening Gerald called me into the kitchen and told me I had to leave, Travis and his wife Amber had already been struggling for 2 months. Travis had been fired from his job at a landscaping company for showing up late 6 times in 1 month and arguing with the foreman when confronted. Amber refused to work. She described herself online as a full-time lifestyle content creator and mommy blogger, though as far as I could tell her total audience was approximately 300 followers, mostly bots. They had a 2-year-old son named Brody who, from every account I ever heard, was actually a sweet kid caught in an impossible situation. Gerald's solution to Travis's financial implosion was to invite them all to move into our house. And to make room for them, he needed my bedroom for Brody and the den for Travis and Amber, which meant he needed me gone. "You are 19, Gerald said, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. "You are a grown man. It is time you stood on your own 2 feet. I remember standing there in the kitchen, the smell of that chili thick in the air, the TV announcer calling a 3rd down conversion in the background, and I remember feeling something settle inside my chest. Not rage, not grief, something colder than both of those things. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had paid for Travis's truck, covered Travis's rent twice before, and now stood before me with the straight spine of someone who believed he was doing the right thing. I said, "Okay." Just that. 1 word. Gerald blinked. I think he expected a fight. I think he wanted a fight so he could feel righteous about what he was doing. I did not give him one. I turned around, walked to my room, and started making a mental list. And the first item on that list was the manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. If I had known what was inside that folder was about to unravel everything Gerald had built, I might have let myself smile right then. Instead, I just pulled it out, set it on my bed, and started reading. Thank you so much for being here at the very beginning of this story. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. 2 hours after Gerald's 11-word verdict, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a 2009 Ford F-250 that smelled like motor oil, black coffee, and the faint chemical sweetness of wood stain. The truck belonged to my grandfather, Earl. He had driven 40 minutes in the dark to come get me, and he had not said a single unnecessary word the entire drive. Earl was 68 years old. He was a Korean War-era Army veteran's son and had served himself in Vietnam for 14 months before an injury sent him home. After the service, he had spent 30 years as a machinist and then another decade doing freelance repair work out of the garage behind his house. He had hands that looked like they had been carved from old oak, and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured slowly into a tin bucket. He was the most deliberately honest man I have ever known, and he was the closest thing to a father I actually had. My mother, Carol, had died of a sudden cardiac event when I was 11 years old. She had been healthy. She had been only 41. The doctors told us afterward that she had a structural defect in her heart that no one had caught, and that it could have happened at any time, and that there was nothing anyone could have done. I do not know if that was supposed to comfort us. It did not. What my mother had done before she died, with the help of a man named Vincent Hale, who was her closest friend from college and who worked as a financial advisor, was set up a custodial savings account in my name with $12,000 she had saved over 8 years from her own income. The account was structured so that the funds would transfer fully to my sole control when I turned 18. Vincent had helped her set up the paperwork. He had been the secondary trustee. And when I turned 18, that money was legally mine alone. I had the documentation. I had the original account agreement, the transfer paperwork, and 12 months of statements printed and kept in that manila folder. $9,200 of that $12,000 was still in the account when I turned 18. I had left it untouched because I intended to use it for the final year of my vocational program and a security deposit on my first apartment when I graduated. In the truck that night, I told Earl what Gerald had said. Earl listened without interrupting, his jaw set, his eyes on the road. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted about 30 seconds. Then Earl said, "He say why?" I told him about Travis, about Amber, about Brody, about the bedroom and the den. Another silence. Earl's hands tightened on the steering wheel, then released. "You going to fight it?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. Earl turned and looked at me for exactly 1 second, which is a long time when you are doing 60 on a county road at night. Then he turned back to the road and nodded very slowly, like he had just confirmed something he already suspected. We drove the rest of the way to his house without talking. My grandmother Helen had the guest room ready, sheets turned down, a glass of water on the nightstand. She hugged me at the door for a long time without saying anything. I appreciated that more than I can explain. That first night, sitting at Earl's kitchen table while Helen made tea, I opened the manila folder and laid everything out. The account agreement, the transfer papers, the most recent bank statement I had printed 2 weeks earlier. The balance on that statement was $9,214. Earl sat across from me, reading each document carefully, holding each page up to the kitchen light the way a man examines a piece of wood for hidden grain. After about 20 minutes, he set the last page down and looked at me. "This account," he said, "Gerald had his name on it anywhere?" "No," I said. "Mom made sure of that. Vincent helped her set it up that way on purpose." Earl nodded again. "So if the money is missing," he said very slowly, "that is a crime." I had not let myself think that word yet. I had been circling it all evening, feeling its edges without looking directly at it. When Earl said it out loud, something shifted in my chest. "I need to go to the bank in the morning," I said. "I will drive you," Earl said. The bank opened at 9 o'clock. We were in the parking lot at 8:53. I walked to the teller window, gave her my account number and my identification, and asked for a current balance and a complete transaction history for the past 12 months. The teller printed it out and slid it across the counter. The current balance was $12.41. I stood at that counter and read the transaction history 3 times. Over the course of 7 months, someone had made a series of withdrawals using a signed authorization form. The withdrawals totaled $9,188. The authorization form on file bore my signature. Except I had never signed any authorization form. I did not react at the counter. I thanked the teller, folded the printout carefully, and walked back out to the truck where Earl was waiting. I handed him the paper. He read it. His face went through about 4 different expressions in about 6 seconds, and then it settled into something absolutely still. "Nolan," he said. "I know," I said. "That is your mother's money." "I know." Earl put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. Neither of us spoke for 2 full miles. Then Earl said something that I would remember word for word for the rest of my life. He said, "The quieter you stay right now, the louder the truth gets later." I put that printout in the manila folder. According to Diane, the household at Gerald's house had transformed with remarkable speed into something that could only be described as a staged performance of prosperity. Amber had redecorated Brody's room with what Diane estimated was close to $2,000 in nursery furniture. All of it photographed and posted online. Travis had acquired a new set of golf clubs, a detail Diane mentioned twice with emphasis. Gerald had taken the family to a steakhouse for dinner to celebrate Travis and Amber moving in, which Diane described as that fancy place downtown, $40 a plate minimum. I listened to all of this and said very little, which confused Diane slightly but did not slow her down. The detail that mattered came near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought. Diane said, "Oh, and your father's friend from the office called the house looking for you. The older gentleman, the one who knew your mother. Vincent something." I sat up very straight. "Vincent Hale?" I said. "That sounds right," Diane said. "He said he had been trying to reach you, and your number was not working. He left a number. My number was working fine. Gerald had simply never passed along the messages." I wrote down Vincent's number, thanked Diane, and ended the call. I sat for a moment in the chair by Earl's window, watching the bare November trees move in the wind outside, and I thought about what it meant that Vincent Hale was trying to reach me. Vincent was not just my mother's college friend. Vincent was a senior financial advisor at a wealth management firm. More specifically, he was the chief operating officer of Hartwell Investment Partners, the financial services division that shared a parent corporation with Hartwell Incorporated, the industrial supply company where Gerald worked as a regional sales manager. In other words, Vincent Hale was, in the organizational chart of corporate life, approximately 3 levels above Gerald's direct supervisor. Vincent had known my mother for 22 years. He had been the secondary trustee on my custodial account, and he had been trying to reach me for what sounded like several weeks, through a phone number that happened to be routed through a household where Gerald controlled the information. I looked at Earl across the kitchen. "I need to make a call," I said. "Go ahead," Earl said, without looking up from his newspaper. I called Vincent Hale. He picked up on the second ring, and the first thing he said was, "Nolan, thank God. I have been trying to reach you for 6 weeks." His voice was careful and controlled, the voice of a man who had spent decades managing high-stakes conversations, but underneath the control there was something urgent, something that had been waiting for release. "I know," I said. "My messages were not getting through." A brief pause. "I suspected as much," he said. Then, "I need you to come to my office. There are things you need to see in person. Can you come this week?" "Yes," I said. "Thursday, 2 o'clock. And Nolan," another pause, "do not mention this call to your father." I told him I had no intention of mentioning anything to Gerald. Then I hung up and sat very still for a moment, feeling the weight of that conversation settle into my understanding. Back at Gerald's house, according to Diane's latest transmission, Travis had thrown a backyard cookout that past weekend and invited 6 people from his old job, the job he had been fired from, and had spent the entire afternoon telling stories about deals he was working on and connections he was building, while Amber photographed the food from 14 different angles, and Gerald refilled everyone's drinks with the satisfied air of a man who had solved a problem. At one point, Travis had raised a beer in the direction of the back fence and said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, Liam had to grow up and get out on his own. Good for him, honestly. That is what men do. He called me Liam. He had never once bothered to learn my actual name. I heard that detail from Diane 3 days before my meeting with Vincent. I filed it away. The quiet was getting louder by the day. And in Vincent's office, I was about to find out that what I thought was a family betrayal was actually something with a federal case number. Vincent Hale's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, in a part of the city that smelled like dry-cleaned wool and expensive coffee. The elevator opened onto a reception area with cream-colored walls, low leather chairs, and the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness but from very good soundproofing. A receptionist led me down a carpeted hallway where the artwork was abstract and the lighting was warm and deliberate, and knocked twice on a heavy mahogany door before opening it. Vincent was standing when I entered, which I noticed because men in positions like his rarely stand to greet someone my age. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of trim, contained physical presence that comes from decades of discipline. He shook my hand with both of his and held on for a moment longer than a standard handshake. You look like her, he said quietly. He meant my mother. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and we sat down. On the desk between us there was a manila folder, thicker than mine. He did not open it yet. I am going to tell you some things, Vincent said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. Some of it is going to be difficult to hear. I nodded. Your father has worked for Hartwell Incorporated for 11 years. He is a competent salesman. He has never been a problem employee in the conventional sense. Vincent paused. 3 months ago, Gerald asked me personally to approve a referral hire. His son Travis, for a junior account support role in the regional office. I kept my face still. I approved it as a courtesy to your father, and because your mother cared about your father, even after everything. He said that last part with a careful flatness that told me he knew exactly what kind of man Gerald was. Travis started in September. In the first 4 weeks, my internal audit team flagged a series of irregular transactions in the client services account that Travis had access to. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside were printed spreadsheets with rows of transactions highlighted in yellow. I leaned forward and looked at the numbers. Over the course of 7 weeks, Vincent said, Travis made 41 unauthorized withdrawals from the client services fund. The total amount removed was $18,500. He let that number sit in the air. The money was transferred to a personal account in Travis's name. From that account it was spent on clothing, watches, golf equipment, luxury goods purchased online and shipped to your father's home address. The golf clubs. Diane had mentioned the golf clubs. Gerald knew. I asked. Gerald knew, Vincent said. We found 3 text messages on Travis's work phone in which Gerald advised him on how to structure the transfers to avoid triggering the automated alert threshold. Gerald suggested keeping individual amounts below $500. He paused. He was almost right. The system threshold was $600. But volume over time triggered a secondary review. I sat back in the chair. The leather was cool against my shoulders. Through the 14th floor window, the city moved below us, small and indifferent. There is more, Vincent said. I looked at him. During the audit of Travis's accounts, our forensic team found a linked credit application filed 3 years ago. The application used Travis's household address, your father's employment as the income reference, and a social security number that does not belong to either of them. He turned the folder 1 more page. It belongs to you, Nolan. Someone used your social security number to open a credit account when you were 16 years old. The account has carried a balance. The current outstanding debt on that account is $14,000. The room was very quiet. I could hear the faint sound of the city through the glass. Identity theft. My father had used my social security number to open a credit line when I was a minor, and he had spent $14,000 on it over 3 years, and I had not known because no one had told me, and no collection notices had ever reached me because Gerald controlled the mail at the house I lived in. I want you to understand, Vincent said, measuring his words carefully, that what I am describing to you constitutes multiple federal offenses: wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft of a minor, which carries its own enhancement under federal sentencing guidelines. He closed the folder. I have given your father and Travis a 7-day window to return the $18,500 from the client fund. That window closes in 4 days. He looked at me steadily. I want you to know this before it closes, because you deserve to know, and because there is a decision I believe you should make. He slid the folder across the desk to me. These are copies, he said. Everything in that folder is yours. The original documentation is already with my legal team. He leaned forward slightly. I also want you to know that your mother's account, the custodial savings account she set up for you, I have been reviewing it. The authorization form on file at the bank carries your signature, but our handwriting analysis preliminary suggests it does not match your signature on file from when the account was originally opened. I reached out and put my hand flat on top of the folder. Forgery, I said. Almost certainly, Vincent said. I sat there for a moment. I thought about the chili on the stove, the football game, the 11 words. I thought about Earl saying that the quieter I stayed, the louder the truth got. I thought about my mother, who had saved $12,000 over 8 years so that her son would have a foundation to stand on. Then I picked up the folder. What do I need to do? I asked. Vincent allowed himself the smallest possible smile. Right now? Nothing. In 4 days, depending on what your father and Travis decide, I will need you to do something very specific. He stood and extended his hand again. In the meantime, I would suggest you make sure your own documentation is organized and complete. It is, I said. He looked at me with an expression I recognized because Earl wore it sometimes. It was the expression of a man who is relieved to find that the person standing in front of him already understands the weight of the moment. I rode the elevator back down to the ground floor. I stepped out into the cold air of the street with that folder under my arm, and I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, watching traffic pass. Then I took out my phone and called Earl. You need to come pick me up, I said. How bad? He asked. Bad enough, I said, that I am going to need you to help me organize some paperwork tonight. There was a brief silence. Then Earl said, I will be there in 20 minutes. I waited on the sidewalk holding the folder, and I thought about what Travis had said at that cookout, raising his beer toward the back fence. Good for him, honestly, that is what men do. He had no idea what men do. He was about to find out. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the shop using a belt sander on a set of cabinet door frames, and the sawdust in the air made the light look golden and hazy. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I looked at the screen and saw Gerald's name, I set down the sander and stepped outside into the cold. I had not spoken to Gerald since the night he told me to leave. That had been 62 days ago. I know the exact number because I had been counting. I answered, Nolan. His voice was different from the voice he had used in the kitchen that October evening. That voice had been clipped and certain, the voice of a man executing a decision. I said nothing. I let the silence work. Look, he said, after a moment. Things have been a little complicated here lately, with Travis and the job situation and everything. You know how it is. He paused. Vincent Hale is an old friend of the family. You know that, and I know you two have probably been in touch. He did not know that. He was probing. I said. Vincent and I have had a professional disagreement about some accounting stuff at the office. It is one of those things where there is a misunderstanding about some fund transfers that Travis processed. It is really just a bookkeeping issue, nothing serious. His voice was working very hard to sound casual. But I was thinking, if you wanted to just put in a good word with Vincent, remind him of your mother's friendship with him. Tell him that the family is going through a rough time and maybe the right thing is to work this out internally. There it was. I stood outside the shop door, the cold air on my face, watching a crow pick at something on the asphalt across the street. Gerald, I said, I want to make sure I understand what you are asking. You want me to use my mother's memory as leverage to convince Vincent Hale to quietly close an investigation into federal fraud. The silence on his end lasted about 4 seconds. I would not characterize it that way. How would you characterize it? Another silence. We are family, Nolan. That still means something. I thought about the kitchen, the football game, the chili. I thought about the bank teller sliding that printout across the counter and the number $12.41. I thought about a 16-year-old version of myself, asleep in his bedroom, while someone used his social security number to open a credit line. You took $9,000 from an account my mother set up for me, I said. You forged my signature to do it. You used my social security number to run up $14,000 in debt when I was 16 years old. And now you are calling me for a favor. Gerald did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, the softness was gone. You do not know the full picture, he said, and his voice had gone cold and hard in the way it gets when he feels cornered. I know enough, I said. Nolan, I am warning you. Do not make this into something it does not have to be. I am not making it into anything, I said. You already did that. I ended the call. I stood there for another moment watching the crow. Then I went back inside, picked up the belt sander, and finished the cabinet doors. That evening I called Vincent and told him that Gerald had reached out. Vincent listened carefully, thanked me, and told me to document the call with a time and date notation. Then he told me that the 7-day window had 3 days left, and that he did not expect Gerald and Travis to pay. He was right. If you have stayed with me this far, you already know this is not a simple story. Drop a number 1 in the comments so I know you are here with me. You are doing great. 3 days later, the window closed. Gerald and Travis did not return the money. Vincent called me at 8 in the morning to tell me he had contacted the company's legal team and that the matter was being referred to the appropriate authorities. He said the process would take some time, that these things moved at their own pace, and that I should sit tight and keep my documentation organized. He thanked me for my integrity and told me to call him if anything unusual happened. Something unusual happened that same evening. I was sitting in Earl's living room after dinner, reading through some notes for my class, when Helen called from the kitchen window that there was a truck parked at the curb outside. I went to the front window and looked through the curtain. It was Gerald's leased company sedan, silver, still clean despite the November mud, parked directly in front of the mailbox. And behind it was Travis's truck, a black pickup that Gerald had co-signed the loan on 2 years ago. They sat in the vehicles for about 4 minutes. I watched the clock. Then both doors opened and they walked up the front path. I opened the door before they knocked. The 2 men standing on Earl's porch did not look like the men from my mental inventory. Gerald, who always carried himself with the rigid posture of someone performing competence, looked diminished. His shirt was not quite right, collar uneven, the kind of detail he never allowed in public. There were dark circles under his eyes. Travis, who had spent 26 years perfecting the expression of a man who believed the world owed him a continuous favor, looked like that debt had just been called in all at once. He was sweating despite the cold. His eyes were moving around the yard, the street, the windows, like he was looking for something or someone he did not want to find. Behind me, I could hear Earl's footsteps stop in the hallway. He did not come forward. He just stopped and stood there, which was somehow more intimidating than anything else he could have done. Gerald spoke first. Nolan, I know this is unexpected. I said nothing. I leaned against the door frame and waited. We need to talk about the situation at the company. Explain what you need, I said. Gerald shifted his weight. Travis was looking at the porch floor. There is a hearing coming up, an internal review. If you are willing to speak to Vincent or provide a written statement, stating that the transfers Travis made were to repay a personal loan that I had taken from a family account to cover your educational expenses. It would reframe the transaction context and most likely result in the matter being resolved quietly without any further legal action. "You have a grandson," I said quietly, "and that is genuinely sad. But the person who put Brody in this situation is standing next to you. Not me. You would let your own brother go to prison," Travis said. His voice cracked slightly on the word brother. I looked at him for a long moment. "I do not have a brother," I said. "I have a man who used my name as a financial instrument when I was a child, and a father who taught him how to do it. And I have a statement I need to give to a federal investigator, which I am planning to give truthfully." Travis took a step forward. It was not a large step, but it was an aggressive one, and from behind me I heard Earl move in the hallway, one deliberate step, the creak of the floorboard, a sound so controlled it was almost a word. Travis stopped. Gerald put a hand on Travis's arm. He looked at me one more time, and I think in that moment he was actually seeing me clearly for the first time in 19 years. He was seeing that the quiet kid in work boots had kept records. "Good," he said. "That was all. We went back to what we were doing." I sat back down with my notes, but I was not reading them anymore. I was thinking about what I needed to do next, and I was thinking about it with the particular clarity that only comes when you have stopped hoping the situation will resolve itself and started understanding that you are the only one who can resolve it. There is something that nobody tells you about the process of dismantling someone's carefully constructed lie, and it is this: the actual work is quiet. It is not dramatic. It does not look from the outside like anything at all. It looks like a person sitting at a desk at 11 o'clock at night, in a pool of lamplight, with a laptop and a folder and a glass of water. That is what it looked like when I did it. I had spent the 3 days since Gerald and Travis's visit organizing everything with a precision that would have impressed Bill Parrish, my instructor at the vocational program. I had made 4 complete copies of every document in my folder: the original account agreement for the custodial savings account, the forged authorization form with the signature that was not mine, the complete transaction history showing $9,188 removed in 7 months, the credit account application bearing my stolen Social Security number, and the spreadsheets Vincent had copied for me showing Travis's 41 unauthorized withdrawals totaling. 1 copy went to Earl's fireproof safe in the garage. 1 copy went into a sealed envelope that Earl mailed to a post office box we opened in his name. 1 copy went with me, and 1 copy I was about to use. The first thing I did that night was write an email to Amber. I want to be precise about why I chose Amber, because it was not cruelty. I had thought about this carefully. Amber was not a co-conspirator. She was a woman who had been photographing expensive items she believed her husband had purchased legitimately, and posting them under her real name to a public account, creating a documented public record of stolen goods being displayed as personal assets. She was, without knowing it, an unwitting exhibit in a federal case. She also had a 2-year-old son who was going to need a parent who was not incarcerated. The email I wrote to Amber was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph stated simply that I was Nolan, Travis's half-brother, and that I was contacting her because there was information she had a right to have before legal proceedings began. The second paragraph attached 6 documents: the spreadsheet of Travis's unauthorized withdrawals, the dates and amounts of 4 specific purchases visible in her online posts that corresponded to transactions on the company account, and a copy of the preliminary fraud report that Vincent's legal team had filed. The third paragraph stated that the hearing was scheduled and that anyone who could demonstrate cooperation with investigators before that date would be in a meaningfully different position than those who could not. I read the email 3 times. Then I attached the documents, confirmed the attachments, and pressed send. I sat for a moment and looked at the sent confirmation on the screen. Then I opened a new browser window. The second thing I did was more methodical. Travis had a social media presence that he used aggressively, mostly to project an image of a man on the rise, a man with connections and opportunities and resources. Then I used an anonymous email service to send this document to 11 people. The 6 former colleagues Travis had invited to the cookout, whose email addresses I found through their public professional profiles, and 5 members of the weekend golf group whose contact information was visible through a group activity page they maintained online. I did not identify myself. I did not explain anything or add commentary. I sent the document. The hearing was in 11 days. Earl and I drove home in the F-250 through a light rain, and I sat in the passenger seat and felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical work but from sustained, deliberate focus, the kind that has been holding something very heavy in exactly the right position for a very long time. Travis, meanwhile, had gone very quiet. His social media accounts were empty. His phone, according to Diane's sources, was going to voicemail. The golf group had stopped inviting him to games, a development that happened with impressive speed after the anonymous document reached them. I thought about that for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and took a screenshot of Gerald's text message, noted the date and time, and emailed it to Vincent's legal team with a subject line that read, "Additional documentation." I did not respond to Gerald. On the evening before the hearing, Earl and I sat on the back porch of his house, even though it was cold, because Earl liked the night air and I did not argue with that. I did not say anything to that. I just sat in the cold night air with my beer and my grandfather and the wooden chairs that would probably outlast all of us. The bail hearing was a preliminary proceeding, which in practical terms meant it was shorter and less formal than a full trial. But it was still a federal courtroom, which meant it was public, and the gallery that morning held, by my count, about 30 people. Then Addison Ruiz presented the identity theft component. "In your professional assessment," Addison Ruiz asked, "was the withdrawal of funds from this minor's custodial account a legitimate transaction?" "It was not," Vincent said. "The authorization form was a forgery. The funds were removed without the account holder's knowledge or consent." He said it simply and without drama, in the measured voice of a man whose job it is to tell the truth about money, and in that courtroom it landed like a structural beam. Travis's attorney tried to cross-examine Vincent. He asked whether it was possible that the signature discrepancy was the result of a minor signing differently at different times, as young people sometimes do. Vincent replied that handwriting analysis had been conducted by a certified forensic examiner, that the examiner's report was in the prosecution's documentation, and that the findings were unambiguous. The attorney thanked Vincent and sat down. Then Gerald did something that I did not expect, and neither, from the look on his attorney's face, did his attorney. Gerald stood up. His attorney reached out and put a hand on his arm, but Gerald shook it off. He was not supposed to speak. He was there as a respondent in the identity theft component, not as an active participant in Travis's hearing. But Gerald stood up and he spoke. "He was going to get the money eventually," Gerald said. His voice was loud in the quiet courtroom. "That money was sitting in an account doing nothing. I used it for the family. I used it for my son. And Vincent Hale has had a personal agenda in this situation from the beginning because he never approved of me. From the day Carol introduced us, he never approved, and this whole thing is his way of settling a 20-year grudge." The courtroom was very still. Judge Briggs looked at Gerald with an expression that was almost clinical. The courtroom began to empty. I sat and watched Gerald from across the room, and for a single moment his eyes found mine. I took the photograph of my mother from the nightstand, the one Helen had given me when I moved in, taken at a 4th of July picnic in her mid-30s, squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. I sat with it for a while. Then I put it down, turned off the light, and slept for 10 hours straight. Layer 2. The legal reckoning. The federal proceedings moved over the following weeks with the deliberate, grinding efficiency of a system that does not hurry for anyone. Travis entered a guilty plea on 3 counts: wire fraud, embezzlement of client funds, and identity theft conspiracy. The total amount he owed me was $24,643. The forgery charge related to the custodial account was handled through civil court, where Vincent's legal team assisted me in filing a claim. That process took several months, but it resolved in my favor with interest. Layer 3. The social collapse. Gerald was terminated from Hartwell Incorporated within a week of his guilty plea. The termination was for cause, which meant no severance, and, because the firing was connected to a criminal conviction, it triggered a clause in his pension agreement that reduced his eventual benefits substantially. Layer 4. The new life 7 months after the hearing. I was working full-time. Vincent had offered me a paid internship at Hartwell Investment Partners during the proceedings, and after the case is concluded, he converted it to a formal junior analyst position with a starting salary that was more than Gerald had ever acknowledged my labor at the shop was worth. The work suited me in ways I had not fully anticipated. It involved reading contracts, evaluating documentation, understanding the ways that financial structures could be designed to protect or to exploit. Bill Parrish had been right. A man who could read a document was a man with options. I rented a studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from Earl and Helen's house. It had one window that faced west, which meant good evening light. I bought a used wooden desk from a thrift shop and refinished it myself using techniques I had learned at Hendricks & Sons. It was the first piece of furniture I had ever owned outright. I visited Earl and Helen on Sunday evenings. We sat on the back porch when the weather allowed, in the chairs Earl had built 30 years ago, and we talked about things that mattered and things that did not, and I was grateful in a way that I was still learning how to express. The photograph of my mother moved from Earl's guest room nightstand to the desk in my apartment. I placed it where I would see it when I sat down to work. Layer 5. The lesson I have thought a lot about what I would say to someone who is in the position I was in, not just the specific circumstances, but the shape of it. Being 19 and dismissed, being young in a room where people have decided your future does not inconvenience theirs, being the person that someone who should love you has decided is expendable. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. The people who underestimate you are making a mathematical error. They see your current position, your resources, your age, and they calculate a threat level. And if those numbers are low enough, they proceed as if you are not a factor. This is the most dangerous mistake a person in power can make, because it is a mistake rooted not in strategy but in contempt. And contempt makes people sloppy. Contempt makes people leave text message trails. Contempt makes people put things in writing that they would never put in writing if they were paying attention. Contempt makes people stand up in a federal courtroom and start talking when their attorney is trying to stop them. Gerald and Travis did not lose because I was smarter than them. They lost because they were certain I was not smart enough to be a problem. The second thing I know is that documentation is the most powerful tool available to someone who has been wronged, and it is almost entirely free. I had a manila folder. I had a printer. I had the habit, instilled by Earl and by Bill Parrish, of writing things down and keeping the paper. That was all. That folder was the thing that turned a family betrayal into a federal case, and it cost me nothing but the discipline to pay attention. The third thing, and this is the one I think about most, is about the people who show up. Vincent Hale did not have to make those calls. He did not have to use his position to ensure that justice moved in the right direction for a 19-year-old kid whose mother he had known in college. Earl did not have to drive 40 minutes in the dark to pick me up without asking questions first. Helen did not have to turn down the guest room sheets and put a glass of water on the nightstand. These were choices that people made because they had decided long before the crisis arrived what kind of people they were going to be. I had parents in the ways that actually count. Just not the one I was assigned. To anyone out there who is being counted out right now, who is being told you are expendable, who is being dismissed by people who believe they are untouchable. Start the folder. Write down the dates. Keep the receipts. Stay quiet and let the truth accumulate. Because the truth has a weight to it, and given enough time and the right room, that weight becomes gravity, and gravity is not negotiable. Gerald learned that. Travis is learning it now in a federal facility 7 years at a time. And I am sitting at a desk I refinished myself, in an apartment I paid for with money I earned, next to a photograph of a woman who trusted me with $12,000 and a future, and I have not wasted a single dollar of either one. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reached you, if it said something that matters to you, please leave a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is true.